The morning train pulled into Dusty Creek with a long, mournful whistle that echoed across the empty plains like something grieving. Steam rolled off the iron wheels in slow, lazy billows, catching the pale gold of the early light before disappearing into the open sky. The few townspeople who had gathered on the platform shuffled nervously, pulling their collars up against the dry morning chill. Nobody quite knew what to expect. A telegram had arrived 3 weeks ago, brief and plain, almost businesslike in the way it said nothing beyond what was necessary. A woman was coming, a bride, and the cowboy who had sent for her had not slept a single full night since the telegram was sent. Her name was Clara Weston, and she stepped off that train with nothing but a worn leather satchel and eyes red from crying, and she did not try to hide it. She stood at the edge of the platform with the satchel pressed against her chest, looking out at the sprawling, sunburned town as if she were quietly deciding whether to step back onto the train and disappear entirely into the distance. The townspeople murmured to each other under their breath, some looking away out of a kind of polite discomfort, others watching openly with the unguarded curiosity of people who have little enough excitement in their days. But one man, tall, weathered hat pulled low against the light, stepped forward from the end of the platform, moving slowly and carefully, the way a man moves when he is afraid of startling something fragile. His name was Elias Holt, and he was not what Clara had imagined during the long weeks she had spent preparing herself for this moment. She had expected something rough and commanding, something that matched the blunt and businesslike tone of the advertisement she had answered in a Boston newspaper on a cold November afternoon. What she found instead was a man who kept his distance, who did not reach for her bags or fill the silence with reassurances, who simply stood 3 feet away and looked at her with the kind of eyes that had seen too much sun and not nearly enough kindness in return. He cleared his throat. He extended one hand, slowly, the way you extend something you're not sure will be received. And then, quietly, leaning just slightly forward, so that only she could hear, he said something she had not prepared for. "You don't have to pretend," he said. The words were so simple, so completely without decoration, that they almost didn't land at first, like a stone dropped into water that takes a moment before the ripples begin. Clara blinked. She had prepared 100 different things to say on that platform. Polite things, careful things, composed and practiced things designed to make a solid first impression on a man she had agreed to marry without ever once meeting face to face. But those 4 quiet words cut straight through every rehearsed line she had brought with her, like a knife through silk, clean and sudden and impossible to undo. Her chin trembled. She pressed her lips together hard. The whole dusty, sunlit world went silent around the two of them. She lost it, right there on that sun-bleached platform, in front of the blacksmith and the minister and 3 wide-eyed children peeking from behind their mother's skirt. Clara Weston broke down completely, not in a delicate or dignified way, not the soft, restrained tears that polite society tolerates, but in the raw, heaving, entirely unglamorous way of a person who has held everything in for so long that one small act of kindness becomes the single crack that breaks the whole dam open at once. Elias did not step back. He did not look around at the watching townspeople, did not straighten with discomfort or shift his weight with impatience. He stood completely steady and let her cry until the crying was done. And when she finally gasped and looked up at him with hot embarrassment burning in her cheeks, he said only, quietly and without any judgment at all, "Let's get you out of this heat." The ride to the ranch was long and quiet, and Clara sat beside him on the wagon seat with her satchel balanced in her lap, watching the open land roll past her in wide amber waves of dry grass and pale sage. She had grown up in Boston, in the noise and the crowding and the narrow streets that always smelled of coal smoke and ambition, and people living pressed too close together. This silence felt strange to her, almost unsettling, like a sound she didn't yet know how to hear. But Elias made no effort to fill it with reassurances or small talk or the kind of cheerful, empty conversation people use to cover discomfort. He drove the wagon steadily and unhurried, and every few miles he would point at something without speaking. A hawk turning slow circles overhead, a cluster of wildflowers pushing up through cracked dry earth, as if quietly showing her that there were things here worth noticing, if she was willing to look. The ranch was nothing like the picture her imagination had painted during the weeks of waiting. She had expected something rough and barely standing, something that smelled of neglect and hard survival. What she found instead was a house with curtains in the windows, faded yellow curtains, clearly old, clearly chosen at some earlier time by someone who had hoped for something. The porch boards were swept clean. The water pump by the well had been polished to a shine that caught the afternoon light. And on the kitchen table, wrapped carefully in a clean dish towel, sat a loaf of bread, still warm from an oven that had not been cold long. Clara stood in the doorway and looked at all of it, and something in the center of her chest shifted, quietly and without announcement, like a door swinging open onto a room she had not known was there. That night, they sat across from each other at the table and talked for the first time. Really talked, without the formality of performance or the weight of being watched. She learned that he had lost a wife 3 years ago to a fever that swept through the valley in the spring, quiet and merciless. That the yellow curtains were hers. That the bread had been baked by the neighbor woman, who had insisted and would not hear otherwise. That Elias himself had barely eaten in the 3 days before Clara's arrival because he hadn't known what to do with the waiting, and that doing nothing had felt worse than anything. Clara told him she had come because there was nothing left for her in Boston. No family, no real future, only the slow gray feeling of disappearing without anyone quite noticing. He listened to every word she said. He did not look away once. The first week moved carefully, like two people walking around something fragile they have both agreed not to name. Clara learned the rhythms of the ranch. The chickens fed before the sun was fully up. The water carried before the day got hot. The particular creak of the third porch board and the way the kitchen window stuck in its frame when the heat peaked in the afternoon. Elias showed her the land piece by piece. The east pasture where the soil was richest, the creek that ran low by late summer, the hill at the far edge of the property, where on a clear day you could see 3 counties laid out beneath you like a map. They worked beside each other without pressure or expectation, moving through the daily labor in a kind of parallel quiet. But they watched each other, carefully, steadily, the way strangers do when they are slowly deciding, without saying so, to trust. It was on the 9th day that she found the box. It sat on the shelf above the fireplace, a plain cedar box, small enough to hold easily in 2 hands, unremarkable in every way. She had not meant to open it. She had been running a cloth along the mantelpiece when it simply fell, and when the lid came loose on the way down, she saw what was inside before she could stop herself. Letters. Dozens of them, neatly stacked, all addressed to Elias, all sealed and unopened. The handwriting on each envelope was the same, looping, deliberate, feminine, and the postmarks ran back years. She felt the chill move through her slowly, from the back of her neck downward, before her mind had even finished assembling the question. When Elias came in from the field for supper, she was sitting at the table with the box in front of her, both hands folded on top of it, waiting. He stepped through the door and saw her, and the stillness that came over him was immediate and complete. The stillness of a man who has been found out about something he had not planned to explain. The silence between them stretched long and taut. Clara did not accuse him. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked at him steadily across the table and asked one question in a calm and even tone. "Who wrote to you?" The answer that came back, slow, halting, carrying years of grief and complicated feeling, told her something that changed the way she understood everything she had seen so far. They were letters from a woman in Denver, a woman named May, who had written to Elias for 2 full years after his wife died, convinced in the sincere and persistent way of some people that she could help pull him back from his grief if she just kept reaching. He had never written back. He had never opened a single one of them, but he had kept every letter in that cedar box, because throwing them away felt to him like another small cruelty layered on top of all the others, and he had enough of those already. Clara sat with all of this for a long time after he finished speaking, turning it over slowly in her mind. She thought about loneliness. She thought about the different shapes that reaching toward another person can take when you are afraid of the dark. And she found, to her own quiet surprise, that what she felt was not jealousy. It was something much closer to understanding. That night, for the first time, they sat together on the porch after supper with no particular purpose. Just 2 people in the cooling evening air as the stars came out one by one over the flatlands, enormous and patient and seemingly without end. Elias brought out 2 cups of coffee, dark and bitter, and handed one to her without a word or a question. She wrapped both hands around the warmth of it and looked up at the sky for a long time. Then she said, simply and quietly, "I've never seen so many stars." He said, "You get used to them." There was a pause. Then, in the same quiet voice, he said, "I'm glad you're here, Clara." She didn't say anything back. She didn't feel that she needed to. She just looked at the stars and let the words settle into her like warmth. By the second week, something between them had softened. Not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself, but in the small and daily way that trust is actually built between real people. He started waiting for her at breakfast instead of eating alone at the early light. She started asking him questions about the land, about the history of the property, about the animals and the seasons and the way the weather changed out here, and he answered with more words than she had expected from a man who used them so sparingly in other circumstances. One afternoon he found her wrestling with the stuck kitchen window and spent a full hour beside her, patient and methodical, until it finally gave. When it did, she laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, and he smiled the way a man smiles when he has been saving one up for a while before he lets it out. The formal arrangement had already been made. They both understood this. They were to be married within the month. But somewhere inside those 2 quiet weeks, the settled agreement had become something else entirely. Something she hadn't expected when she had stepped off that train with her satchel and her red-rimmed eyes. She was no longer counting the days toward the wedding the way one counts toward a fixed appointment, something settled and arranged and already decided. She was counting them the way you count towards something you have begun, without quite meaning to want for yourself. That difference felt enormous when she finally noticed it. She lay awake one night listening to the wind move through the prairie grass and realized, slowly and clearly, that she had stopped being afraid. The wedding was small, just the minister, the neighbor woman who had brought the bread, and 2 ranch hands who had cleaned up as best they could and stood at the back with their hats in their hands and serious expressions. Clara wore the dress she had brought from Boston, ivory and worn at the elbows, the best thing she had owned for a long time. Elias wore his only good shirt, pressed that morning with more care than he likely wanted anyone to notice. There were no flowers and there was no music. But when the minister asked if she took this man, Clara turned and looked directly at Elias, not at the minister, not at the small gathered crowd, and said, "I do," in the steadiest voice she had ever used for anything in her life. He heard it. She saw it land in his eyes like something arriving where it was supposed to be. The first months of married life were not without their difficulties. She had not expected them to be. Ranch life was hard in ways that were difficult to prepare for from a distance. Hard with a physical relentlessness and an endurance required that Clara had not previously needed to find in herself. There were arguments, small, sharp ones, the kind that arise between 2 people who have each learned to do things a particular way over years of doing them alone. There were long days of heavy labor and evenings of exhaustion, that left no room for much else. But they had made an unspoken agreement somewhere in those early weeks. Neither could have said exactly when, to work through things rather than around them. And so they did, imperfectly, with effort, and with a kind of grace that grew steadier with practice. It was in the third month that Clara discovered she was expecting. She sat alone with the knowledge for 3 full days, carrying it privately, turning it over in the quiet of her own mind, feeling the strange double weight of it, the enormity and the wonder balanced in equal measure, before she finally told him. She did it simply, at breakfast, between one sip of coffee and the next, as if she were reporting something practical. Elias went completely still. He set his cup down with great care. Then he looked across the table at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before, something open and entirely unguarded, something raw in the best possible way, something that had no name she knew. He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers and said nothing at all. He didn't need to. In the spring, the baby came. A girl, small and alarmingly loud and fiercely, obviously alive in every possible way. They named her Hope because that was precisely what she was, and both of them knew it without having to discuss it. Clara lay in the bed with the baby on her chest, and Elias sitting in the chair beside her, his hat in his hands, looking at both of them with the expression of a man who does not quite trust a good thing not to disappear before he has had time to get used to it. She reached over and took his hand and placed it flat on the baby's small back. She said, "She's staying, Elias, and so am I." He nodded, slowly, and she watched something in him, some last deeply held tension, something he had carried for years, release at last, quietly, like a knot finally given permission to come undone. Years later, when their daughter was old enough to bask about the beginning of things, the way children always eventually do, Clara would pause in whatever she was doing and smile in that quiet, particular way she had developed for this question. She would tell her about the train from Boston and the platform in Dusty Creek, and the eyes red from crying, and the man who stood 3 feet away with his hat low against the light. She would tell her about 4 words spoken quietly enough that only 2 people in the world could hear them. She would tell her that love does not always arrive the way people expect it to, like a storm, like something dramatic and undeniable. Sometimes it arrives just like that, quietly on a dusty platform in a whisper. She would tell her that sometimes 4 words are more than enough to begin an entire life.